You're standing at the edge of a crowded party, watching dozens of people laugh, connect, and seemingly thrive in each other's company. The music pulses, conversations flow like rivers of shared experience, and everyone appears to be living their most authentic lives. Yet something profound strikes you, a realization that cuts through the social fabric like a blade through silk. The people who seem most dependent on this collective energy, most addicted to the validation and warmth of the crowd, are often the very ones who've never truly met themselves. Now imagine the opposite scenario. Picture someone who chooses solitude not as an escape from the world, but as a deliberate journey into the depths of their own consciousness. They sit alone in their study, surrounded not by the chatter of voices seeking approval, but by the profound silence that allows genuine thoughts to emerge. This person isn't hiding from life, they're excavating it, layer by layer, discovering truths that can only be found in the philosophy of solitude. This is where Nietzsche's Sigma Paradox reveals itself in all its unsettling glory. The very people we've been conditioned to see as isolated, disconnected, or socially deficient might actually be the ones who've discovered something the crowd never could: authentic individual strength. They've learned that true personal growth doesn't come from external validation or endless social connection, but from the courage to face themselves completely, without the comforting buffer of other people's opinions and expectations. But here's what makes this revelation so psychologically disturbing. We live in a world that has completely inverted the relationship between solitude and strength. We've been programmed to believe that being alone equals being weak, that needing others constantly is a sign of health, and that the loudest voices in the room possess the most wisdom. Social media feeds us a constant stream of group photos, collaborative projects, and networking events, all designed to reinforce the myth that connection equals fulfillment, that visibility equals value. Yet what if this entire framework is not just wrong, but actively destructive to the human spirit? What if the people who choose the path of solitude, not as hermits running from responsibility, but as individuals committed to self-discovery, are actually accessing levels of mental clarity, creative power, and philosophical depth that remain forever hidden to those trapped in the endless cycle of social performance? Consider the weight of this possibility. Every time you feel that familiar pang of loneliness, every moment you reach for your phone to fill the silence with someone else's voice, every instance you doubt your own thoughts until they've been validated by others, you might be moving further away from your authentic self, not closer to it. The very behaviors we've been taught represent mental health and social success could be the barriers preventing us from discovering our true individual strength. This isn't about becoming antisocial or rejecting human connection entirely. It's about recognizing that there exists a profound difference between choosing solitude as a path to self-mastery and having isolation imposed upon you by circumstances or fear. The Sigma Paradox suggests that the people who appear to need others the least might actually be the ones most capable of genuine connection when they choose it, precisely because they've learned to connect with themselves first. Think about the implications. If strength truly comes from solitude, if authenticity emerges from the willingness to sit with your own thoughts without distraction, if personal growth requires periods of deliberate disconnection from the crowd's influence, then everything you've been told about success, happiness, and human flourishing might be not just incomplete, but fundamentally backwards. What if the real question isn't, how can I become more social? But rather, how can I become so complete in my solitude that my presence becomes magnetic? What if the people who seem most comfortable alone aren't missing something essential about human connection, but have discovered something essential about human nature that the constantly connected will never find? The Sigma Paradox demands that we examine this uncomfortable truth. In a world obsessed with networking, collaboration, and social proof, the individuals who dare to walk the path of chosen solitude might be the only ones actually becoming who they're meant to be. But why does this inversion exist? Why have we collectively agreed that solitude represents failure while constant social engagement represents success? The answer lies buried in the deepest recesses of human psychology, where ancient survival mechanisms clash with modern consciousness in ways that would have fascinated Nietzsche himself. The human brain evolved in small tribal groups where isolation meant death. Your ancestors who wandered away from the fire, who chose to hunt alone, who preferred their own company to the group's warmth, they didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. This primal programming still pulses through your nervous system today, triggering waves of anxiety every time you find yourself truly alone with your thoughts. What your body interprets as danger, however, your evolved consciousness might recognize as opportunity. Nietzsche understood this tension better than perhaps any philosopher before or since. He saw that the very social bonds that once ensured human survival had become psychological chains in the modern world. The herd mentality that kept our ancestors alive now keeps us spiritually dead, trapped in cycles of conformity that prevent authentic self-discovery. The philosopher who challenged conventional thinking wasn't just questioning established norms, he was pointing toward a deeper realization. All external authorities, including social validation, must eventually be transcended for genuine individual strength to emerge. This creates what we might call the authenticity trap. The more desperately you seek approval from others, the further you drift from your genuine self. Every time you modify your behavior to fit social expectations, every moment you swallow your real thoughts to maintain group harmony, every instance you choose comfort over truth, you're participating in your own psychological diminishment. The crowd doesn't just influence your actions. It gradually erodes your capacity to know what your authentic actions would even be. The modern world has amplified this ancient programming to devastating effect. Social media platforms are designed to trigger your tribal survival mechanisms constantly, flooding your brain with artificial social cues that make solitude feel like social death. The notification sound that makes your heart rate spike, the follow account that determines your self-worth, the constant stream of other people's highlight reels, these aren't just distractions. They're neurological hijacking devices that exploit your deepest evolutionary fears to keep you psychologically dependent on external validation. Consider how this programming manifests in your daily life. When was the last time you sat in complete silence for an hour without reaching for stimulation? When did you last make a significant decision based purely on your own inner compass, without consulting friends, family, or online communities? How often do you catch yourself modifying your opinions mid-sentence based on the facial expressions of your listeners? These moments reveal the extent to which your authentic self has been compromised by social conditioning. The philosophy of solitude that emerges from this understanding isn't about rejecting human connection, it's about reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. True strength in solitude comes from recognizing that your deepest insights, your most creative breakthroughs, and your most authentic expressions can only emerge when you're free from the constant pressure to perform for others. This doesn't make you antisocial, it makes you selectively social, choosing connections that enhance rather than diminish your authentic self. Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, the individual who creates their own values rather than inheriting them from society. But he also understood that this transformation requires periods of deliberate isolation, times when you must withdraw from the crowd's influence to discover what you actually believe, feel, and desire. The Sigma Paradox suggests that this withdrawal isn't a temporary phase but an ongoing practice, a conscious choice to prioritize inner development over external approval. The psychological roots run even deeper. Your fear of solitude isn't just about evolutionary programming. It's about confronting the aspects of yourself that you've been trained to hide, ignore, or suppress. When you're constantly surrounded by others, you can maintain comfortable illusions about who you are. Solitude strips away these illusions, forcing you to face your authentic thoughts, desires, and fears without the comforting buffer of social distraction. This confrontation terrifies most people because it reveals the gap between their public persona and their private reality. The person who seems confident in groups might discover profound insecurity when alone. The individual who appears emotionally stable in social settings might find chaos brewing in their inner world. The one who projects success and happiness might encounter deep wells of unfulfilled longing when the social mask finally comes off. But here's what the crowd will never understand. This confrontation isn't punishment, it's liberation. Every uncomfortable truth you discover about yourself in solitude is a doorway to authentic personal growth. Every illusion that crumbles when you're alone clears space for genuine self-knowledge to emerge. This is the foundation of what ancient philosophy called Stoicism, not emotional suppression, but the development of existential strength that comes from facing reality without flinching. The mental health that comes from this kind of unflinching self-examination, without social buffers, creates a foundation for strength that no external validation could ever provide. The consequences of this mass flight from solitude extend far beyond individual psychology. They're reshaping the very fabric of human consciousness in ways that most people never recognize. You're living through a collective forgetting, a species-wide amnesia about what it means to be truly alone with your own mind. And this forgetting is creating a hidden epidemic of spiritual emptiness that no amount of social connection can cure. Watch how people behave when forced into unexpected solitude. The elevator breaks down, leaving them trapped with only their thoughts. Immediately, they reach for their phones. The power goes out during a dinner party. Panic sets in not because of practical concerns, but because the artificial stimulation has suddenly stopped. A flight gets delayed, leaving passengers with hours of unstructured time. Witness the desperate scramble for distractions, the frantic searching for ways to avoid being alone with themselves. This isn't just discomfort, it's a learned incapacity to exist peacefully within your own consciousness. Modern society has created a generation of people who literally don't know how to be with themselves, who experience their own unmediated thoughts as intrusive, threatening, or simply unbearable. The strength in solitude that once defined human depth and creativity has been systematically trained out of us, replaced by an addiction to external stimulation that grows stronger with each passing year. The cognitive consequences are staggering. Your brain, deprived of regular periods of quiet reflection, begins to lose its capacity for deep thinking. The neural pathways that once allowed for sustained contemplation, for working through complex problems internally, for accessing intuitive insights, these pathways atrophy from disuse. You become increasingly dependent on external sources for opinions, decisions, and even basic emotional regulation. The muscle of independent thought weakens until it can barely support the weight of a single original idea. Consider how this plays out in the realm of creativity and innovation. History's greatest breakthroughs have consistently emerged from individuals who spent significant time alone with their thoughts. Scientists working in isolation, artists withdrawing from society to find their voice, philosophers walking solitary paths to reach new insights. But today's creative individuals are encouraged to collaborate constantly, to crowdsource their ideas, to validate every creative impulse through social feedback before pursuing it. The result is a flattening of creative output, a homogenization of thought that reflects the crowd's preferences rather than individual genius. The emotional consequences are equally profound. When you can't tolerate being alone with your feelings, you can't fully process them. Instead, you develop what psychologists call emotional externalization, constantly seeking others to validate, interpret, or simply distract you from your inner experience. Your emotional life becomes a performance rather than a genuine encounter with your own depths. You lose access to the subtle emotional intelligence that can only develop through careful, solitary attention to your inner world. This externalization creates a vicious cycle. The more you rely on others for emotional regulation, the less capable you become of managing your own emotional states. The less capable you become of self-regulation, the more desperately you need social connection to maintain psychological equilibrium. What begins as a preference for social engagement becomes a psychological dependency that makes genuine solitude feel impossible, even threatening. The neurological research confirms these observations. Brains that rarely experience unstimulated quiet time show decreased activity in the default mode network, the neural circuitry responsible for self-reflection, moral reasoning, and understanding others. Constant social stimulation literally rewires your brain in ways that reduce your capacity for the kind of deep, reflective thinking that has traditionally been humanity's greatest strength. You're not just avoiding solitude, you're losing the neurological infrastructure that makes meaningful solitude possible. Perhaps most tragically, this flight from solitude prevents you from accessing what researchers call constructive internal reflection, the mental process through which you integrate experiences, form coherent personal narratives, and develop genuine self-knowledge. Without regular periods of quiet contemplation, your life becomes a series of disconnected experiences rather than a coherent journey of self-discovery. You accumulate memories but not wisdom, encounters but not understanding. The social consequences ripple outward in ways that reshape entire cultures. Societies filled with individuals who can't tolerate solitude become increasingly conformist, risk-averse, and dependent on groupthink for decision-making. The diversity of thought that emerges from individual contemplation gets replaced by the echo chamber effects of constant social validation. Innovation stagnates because breakthrough ideas require the kind of sustained, solitary focus that fewer people can maintain. Even your relationships suffer from this solitude deficit. When you can't be comfortably alone with yourself, you bring a desperate neediness to every social interaction. Instead of connecting from a place of wholeness, you connect from a place of lack, seeking others to fill the gaps in your own self-understanding. This creates relationships based on mutual dependency rather than mutual appreciation, connections that drain rather than energize both parties. The ultimate consequence is a kind of existential hollowness that no amount of social activity can fill. You can surround yourself with friends, followers, and constant stimulation, yet still feel fundamentally empty because you've lost touch with a source of meaning that can only be accessed in solitude: your own authentic relationship with existence itself. The Sigma Paradox reveals that this emptiness isn't a problem to be solved through more connection, but a signal pointing toward the necessity of reconnecting with your own depths. The path to breaking free from this psychological imprisonment begins with a radical reframe. What if your discomfort with solitude isn't a weakness to overcome, but a compass pointing toward your greatest untapped strength? What if the very anxiety you feel when alone with your thoughts is actually your psyche's way of alerting you to the transformative work that awaits in those quiet spaces? True liberation starts with recognizing that choosing solitude in a hyperconnected world is itself an act of philosophical rebellion. Every moment you resist the urge to reach for your phone when boredom strikes, every evening you spend in contemplation rather than social media scrolling, every decision you make based on your own inner wisdom rather than crowd consensus, these become revolutionary acts of self-reclamation. You're not just changing your behavior, you're rewiring your brain to remember what it feels like to be sovereign over your own consciousness. The first breakthrough comes when you realize that strength in solitude isn't about enduring isolation. It's about discovering the richness of your own inner landscape. Your mind, when freed from the constant input of other people's thoughts and expectations, reveals itself to be far more interesting, creative, and wise than you ever imagined. The silence you once feared becomes a canvas for thoughts you never knew you had, insights that could only emerge when your consciousness isn't competing with external noise. Start small but be consistent. Begin with 10 minutes of daily solitude. No phone, no book, no podcast, no distraction of any kind. Simply sit with yourself and observe what happens. Initially, your mind will rebel, throwing up every possible reason to return to stimulation. Your ancient programming will interpret this stillness as danger, flooding you with restlessness, anxiety, even physical discomfort. This isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're doing something necessary. As you build tolerance for your own company, something remarkable begins to shift. The thoughts that seemed so chaotic and overwhelming when you first encountered them in silence begin to settle into patterns. You start to recognize the difference between thoughts that are genuinely yours and thoughts that are simply social programming you've internalized. The voice of your authentic self, long buried under layers of external influence, begins to speak with clarity and authority. This process reveals one of the most counterintuitive truths about human psychology. The people who are most comfortable being alone are often the most magnetic in social situations. When you no longer need external validation to feel complete, your presence becomes powerful rather than needy. You stop performing for others and start simply being yourself. An authentic presence has a gravity that performance can never match. The rebellion deepens as you begin to question not just your relationship with solitude, but your relationship with social connection itself. You start choosing your interactions more deliberately, seeking connections that enhance rather than diminish your authentic self. Instead of networking for validation, you connect for genuine exchange of ideas and experiences. Instead of talking to fill silence, you speak only when you have something meaningful to contribute. This selectivity often means your social circle will shrink, but the quality of your connections will exponentially increase. The people who remain in your life will be those who appreciate your authenticity rather than your performance, who value your genuine thoughts rather than your ability to tell them what they want to hear. These relationships, built on a foundation of mutual respect for individual authenticity, become sources of genuine nourishment rather than psychological drain. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that your periods of solitude aren't breaks from living, they're where your real life happens. In those quiet moments of self-discovery, you're not avoiding the world. You're preparing to engage with it from a place of genuine power. Every insight gained in solitude becomes a tool for navigating the complexities of human existence with greater wisdom and effectiveness. This transformation challenges everything society has taught you about success and happiness. You discover that your most creative ideas emerge not from brainstorming sessions with others, but from quiet contemplation. Your most important decisions become clearer not through endless consultation, but through careful attention to your own inner wisdom. Your deepest sense of fulfillment comes not from external achievements or social recognition, but from the ongoing process of becoming more fully yourself. The practice of chosen solitude becomes a form of mental strength training. Just as physical muscles grow stronger through resistance, your psychological muscles, focus, self-awareness, emotional regulation, creative thinking, develop through the gentle resistance of spending time alone with your own mind. This isn't about becoming antisocial. It's about developing the inner strength that makes you truly valuable to others when you choose to engage. As this transformation deepens, you begin to see the Sigma Paradox not as a philosophical concept but as a lived reality. The people around you who seem most desperate for social validation appear increasingly fragile, while those who are comfortable in their own company radiate a quiet confidence that needs no external confirmation. You've joined the ranks of individuals who have discovered that the ultimate source of strength isn't found in the crowd. It's found in the courage to face yourself completely and emerge with an unshakable sense of who you are. Here lies the deepest truth that the world desperately doesn't want you to discover. The very quality that society labels as antisocial, weird, or incomplete, your ability to thrive in solitude, is actually the marker of the most evolved human consciousness. You haven't been missing out on life by choosing quiet reflection over constant social stimulation. You've been accessing a level of existence that the perpetually connected will never reach. The ultimate realization strikes like lightning in the darkness. Every moment you've spent genuinely alone with yourself, every time you've chosen introspection over entertainment, every instance you've trusted your own inner voice over the crowd's consensus, you've been practicing the highest form of human development. While others have been outsourcing their consciousness to social media algorithms and group dynamics, you've been cultivating the rarest commodity in the modern world: an authentic relationship with your own existence. This isn't about superiority or isolation, it's about recognizing that you possess something invaluable that no amount of social networking can replicate. You've developed the capacity to generate meaning from within rather than constantly seeking it from external sources. You've learned to be your own best company, which paradoxically makes you the most interesting company for others who are capable of genuine connection. The depth you've discovered in solitude becomes the gift you bring to every relationship, every conversation, every moment of human interaction. The people who have never learned to be truly alone with themselves live in a constant state of spiritual poverty, forever dependent on others to provide what can only come from within. They mistake the buzz of constant connection for aliveness, never realizing that they're experiencing life secondhand, filtered through other people's perceptions and expectations. They've never tasted the pure wine of their own consciousness, diluted as it always is by the opinions and energies of others. But you who have dared to sit in the silence and face whatever arose there, you have accessed the source code of human consciousness itself. In those moments of profound solitude, you've encountered not emptiness but fullness, not isolation but connection to something far more vast and meaningful than any social circle could provide. You've touched the eternal within yourself, the part of you that exists beyond social roles, beyond performance, beyond the need for external validation. This realization transforms everything. The anxiety you once felt about being alone reveals itself as excitement, the thrill of encountering your own depths without interference. The boredom you feared becomes fascination as you discover the endless complexity and richness of your inner world. The loneliness that once drove you toward constant social stimulation transforms into a profound appreciation for your own company, a recognition that you are, in fact, the most interesting person you know. The practical implications are revolutionary. When you no longer need others to complete you, your choices become authentic rather than reactive. Your career path reflects your genuine interests rather than social expectations. Your relationships form around mutual appreciation rather than mutual need. Your creative expression flows from inner inspiration rather than market research. You've become what Nietzsche envisioned, a creator of values rather than a consumer of them, someone who defines meaning rather than desperately seeking it from external sources. This is the final paradox within the Sigma Paradox. By learning to need others less, you become infinitely more valuable to them. Your presence carries weight because it's chosen rather than desperate. Your words have power because they emerge from genuine reflection rather than social programming. Your energy attracts because it's self-generated rather than borrowed from constant external stimulation. The world will try to convince you that this path leads to loneliness, but you've discovered the opposite. True loneliness isn't being physically alone, it's being surrounded by people while feeling completely unknown, even to yourself. True connection isn't constant social interaction. It's the profound recognition that occurs when two authentic beings encounter each other without pretense or performance. And true strength isn't the ability to dominate others, It's the capacity to remain centered and authentic regardless of external circumstances. You've learned the most important lesson human consciousness can master. You are not incomplete. You don't need constant social validation to feel worthy, endless stimulation to feel alive, or continuous connection to feel loved. You are already whole, already complete, already enough. Everything else, every relationship, every achievement, every moment of connection with others, becomes enhancement rather than necessity, joy rather than desperation, choice rather than compulsion. This is your inheritance as someone who has mastered the philosophy of solitude. Unshakable inner peace, creative authenticity, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are when nobody else is watching. You've become unstoppable not because you can overpower others, but because you can no longer be overpowered by the desperate need for their approval. You've discovered that the greatest rebellion in a conformist world isn't to fight against it, but to become so complete within yourself that you no longer need it to define you. In the end, the Sigma Paradox reveals its ultimate truth. Those who appear to need the world least are often the ones who have the most to give it. Having found the infinite within themselves, they become sources rather than drains, creators rather than consumers, lights rather than shadows. This is the path you've chosen, consciously or unconsciously, the path toward becoming fully, authentically, unstoppably yourself.